I'm a senior at Rowan University in South Jersey. My friends and the sorority call me Lucinda. Last summer, I took a Bahamas cruise with some of my girlfriends to let off some steam. We had all just turned 21, so our goals for this vacation were to drink more, and have fun. We all felt like we deserved this vacation after such an exhausting semester spent dealing with Greek life drama and schoolwork. Anyway, I'll keep things short. I was with my friends, Ratty, Nomi, and Tegan. Ratty and I didn't always see eye to eye. There was some petty drama between the two of us. I always assumed she was jealous of me because she never spent any time in the gym and spent a lot of time eating. I think you can see what I'm getting at. Anyway, I was really close with Tegan and Nomi, so I figured things would be peachy. The cruise line we had booked was Carnival, and it would be going to a couple of Bahamas islands before returning to New York City. The boat pulled into the first destination, called Paradise Island. Long story short, all four of us were really wasted at the bar, laughing and flirting with guys so they'd buy us drinks. It was actually really fun. At one point, Nomi asked me if I would grab her a drink, so I did. I went up to the bar, ordered the drinks, and waited. Nomi followed me to grab hers. The drinks came out, but I really wanted to take a selfie with her before we went back to our table. I pulled out my phone and took a couple of selfies with the drinks. Just then, Taylor called Nomi over and, being as drunk as she was, she went bounding off without me, leaving her drink behind. I didn't want someone to steal her drink, so I put my phone on the bar and grabbed her drink with my other hand. With both drinks, I made my way to where they were sitting and made fun of Nomi for being so forgetful. Pretty soon after that, we had to start making our way back towards the boat. The second the boat pulled away, I started frantically searching for my phone. I felt like such an idiot. I had left it at the bar. I started crying, knowing this would ruin our trip. I wanted to jump overboard for losing my phone on the first day of the cruise. I pulled out my laptop to try and locate my phone's location. To my surprise, it wasn't on the island but was actually showing up as somewhere on the boat. It was hard to pinpoint exactly where its location was, but I was relieved to think that someone must have found it and returned it to the Lost and Found or something. I went up to Lost and Found, but they said no one had turned a phone in. Any relief I had was completely gone now. Why would someone take my phone if they weren't planning on returning it? I went back to my friends and cried about it again. Radit told me not to worry about it and that I should just try enjoying the trip as best I could. So that's what I did. I didn't think about it for a whole day, which I was really proud of. You never realize how much time you actually spend on your phone. I kept going to take selfies or check social media, only to realize I had no way of doing so. The next day, though, while I was in the very front of the boat, I pulled my laptop out of my bag to check my phone's location just out of curiosity. To my surprise, it was almost right on top of me. I started looking around, but there were so many people, any one of them could have had my phone. I told my friends this, and they seemed as shocked as I was. All except Ratty. It looked like she was trying to hold back laughter. I started getting really annoyed when I noticed she found my situation funny. A few hours later, we found ourselves in the arcade at the back of the boat, messing around with the childish games and whatnot. Again, I pulled out my laptop and once more, my phone's location was basically on top of me. Now I was furious. Whoever had my phone was following me around the boat. It had to be Ratty. That fatty thought this whole thing was a big joke. I confronted her, showing her proof on my laptop. She insisted that she had no idea what happened to my phone and it wasn't her fault that I was so stupid that I couldn't keep track of it. We started yelling at each other, and I said some pretty mean things. I made her empty her pockets and her purse, which she reluctantly did. My phone wasn't anywhere in sight, though. She called me an idiot again, smirking to herself. I stormed off by myself, tears streaming down my face. I spent the rest of my day in my room and refused to do anything with Ratty for the rest of the night. The next 2 days went by really fast. I refused to hang out with Ratty the whole time and instead spent both days by myself, randomly checking my phone's location out of desperation. When I got back to my room that night, I noticed something weird. There was an envelope lying on the ground, like someone had slipped it under the door. It was a handwritten letter. I started reading and felt disgusted. Some random guy named Edward had supposedly found my phone unlocked, went through it, realized how attractive I was, and wanted to confess his love for me. The letter was really short, but I felt utterly grossed out. Some creep had full access to my phone and knew what room I was staying in. I wanted to cry. I reported this to the cruise security team, hoping they'd be able to do something about it. Unfortunately, they were useless. The good news was that loser Edward didn't try to contact me again, and the cruise ended. Ratty and I made up, and the 4 of us parted ways. I wish I could tell you the story ended there, though. That same night, after my dad drove me home, I was up late watching reality TV on my laptop. That's when it hit me. Why not check my phone's location now? I was kicking myself for not having thought about that sooner. I pulled it up and waited for it to load. I stared in shock as I realized the little blue dot was showing up right on top of my house. My blood ran cold. I screamed, waking my family up. My dad burst into my room, realized what was going on and sprinted outside in his bare feet, brandishing his hunting rifle. I followed close behind. My dad fired a shot into the air and screamed at the top of his lungs. Just then, some guy jumped our side gate and sprinted down the street. My dad hesitated before deciding not to follow him. I was mortified. My dad and I made our way around back, and the scene was horrific. One of my dad's backyard ladders was leaned up against the side of the house, directly underneath my bedroom window. Even more horrifying, though, was that the little wooden latch above the window was almost completely cut through. Maybe a few more minutes and he would have been able to open the window. I might not have been alive to tell the story if I had gone to sleep instead of checking my location. We filed the police report, and it's been almost 2 weeks without an incident. I still have trouble sleeping at night, knowing that some creep has access to all of my information, all my pictures, my name, contacts, and address. My phone has been deactivated, but I can only imagine what kind of data he was able to keep. I'll update if something else happens. This might sound odd to some of you, but I've always dreamed of being a bartender on a cruise ship. I don't know why, but life at sea just sounds so peaceful to me. Plus, I'm what you'd call a social butterfly, and the people you meet on cruise ships always have the most fascinating stories. A few years ago, I made that dream a reality. As a cheerful woman in my mid-20s with a couple of years of bartending experience tucked under my belt, I breezed through the interview process. Royal Caribbean welcomed me as a bartender, and things were off to a great start. I won't bore you with the irrelevant details about my tenure, but you should know that this position came with lots of travel, sometimes too much. After just 2 tours, I interacted with 3 times the number of people that I had while working at my local bar for 2 months. The influx of people was overwhelming, but that's one of the reasons I vied so adamantly for this job. This story takes place during my third tour, a 12-day transatlantic cruise from Miami to Portugal and Spain. It was a long one. We'd be at sea for 5 days straight. There was a silver lining, though. I'd finally be back in Europe, and Royal Caribbean might let me take a week or two to return home to Lyon. To preface, I know how to hold my own against drunk, overly flirtatious men buying drinks from me. Handsome or ugly, old or young, I always work nights, so that's just part of the trade. During this particular cruise, one customer stood out from the rest, though. This tall, attractive 30-something-year-old kept catching my eye night after night. He'd find a seat at my bar, nursing his drink slowly. Eventually, we struck up a conversation about each other's lives, and he was always the last customer to leave the bar at the end of the night. For the first time in a while, I started looking forward to those late nights when Anatole would hang around my bar. I could tell there was some depth behind those light green eyes. A sorrowful look seemed etched into his features. On the third night, I got him to open up about it, and the story was downright depressing. He reluctantly told me about his troubled marriage, pausing often as if weighing each word. His wife Rosalind had been having an affair with his best friend from college, Douglas. I won't get into the specifics, but it sounded brutal. There were a lot of specifics. He literally told me their full names, as if he had been waiting to vent to someone about this for years. He went on to tell me that he had boarded the cruise alone, hoping the vastness of the sea would help him forget his pain. I honestly didn't know how to react other than continuing to fill his glass. The night before we were scheduled to dock in Ponta Delgada, he expressed his gratitude for my company and listening ear. "You've made this trip bearable," he admitted. "Let me buy you a drink to show my thanks." This wasn't the first time I'd been offered a drink, but this time was different. I felt a genuine connection with this man, and it seemed unfair what he had gone through. I obliged, telling him I was happy to have helped him through such a difficult time. Normally, I'd pour my own drink, but he insisted on doing it himself, saying it was the polite and fair thing to do. I should have maintained professional boundaries, but his insistence, combined with his apparent vulnerability, persuaded me otherwise. Reluctantly, I agreed and invited him behind the bar, a decision that might have changed my life. He mixed the drink, his hands steady, and handed it to me with a small, sad smile. The drink tasted fine, but within minutes, a heavy drowsiness clouded my senses. I tried to grasp the edge of the bar for support, but everything went black as I succumbed to the unexpected wooziness. I didn't even have time to scream. When I awoke, the sight before me was terrifying. I was in my own room, but the place was in disarray. It looked like a tornado had ripped through it. Panic surged through me as I realized I was tied to my own bed with a towel shoved down my throat. A wave of relief washed over me as I concluded that my clothes were all still intact, untouched. An hour later, room service found me and freed me. It had been a full day. We were already pulling out of Jamaica. I was more angry than anything else. How could I have been so stupid? I had fallen for Anatole's charming ploy, and he had taken advantage of my sympathetic nature. I doubted Anatole was even his real name. My suite, as I already said, was utterly trashed. My jewelry, phone, and personal belongings were all gone. The safe was wide open, its contents vanished. My suitcase had also disappeared. The cruise ship security team made a massive deal over this, not to the passengers, obviously, but amongst themselves. They reviewed the footage only to discover that the guy had disembarked early in Ponta Delgada, not returning to the ship. The crew had no choice but to leave him behind when he didn't show up at the gangway at departure time. They urged me to keep my mouth shut about all this, telling me not to go to the public. They offered me substantial compensation and promised me they'd find him eventually. After all, he must have used a passport to book the cruise. In the weeks after the cruise, they contacted me and filled me in on what their search turned up. Because the cruise hadn't actually returned to the States, it was a nightmare trying to contact American police and give them details on the crime and the perpetrator. Portugal was a little more compliant, conducting at least a semblance of a search, but even I knew there was no way Anatole was still in Portugal. The United States eventually did get involved, launching a full-scale investigation. The identities that man had used were all real passport, real name, real address, real everything. They went to his supposed place of residence first. The landlord told them that Anatole had moved just over a month ago, leaving nothing behind. The landlord did have a personal phone number of his, but that was of course disconnected. The police looked for any property in his name, but there was nothing. His criminal history was also suspiciously clean. The guy had never even gotten a parking ticket. The police went to his previous jobs, all of which gave the same story. The only address they had was the one he left, and the only phone number they had was the one he had disconnected. I was furious. They literally had his full identity. There must have been something more they could have done. I couldn't help but blame myself for this whole ordeal. You might think things ended there, you'd be very wrong. I took an extended leave from Royal Caribbean, hoping to distance myself from the whole thing. Unfortunately, the situation only escalated. About a month later, I received the first one. A blank envelope was left at my apartment with a single photograph inside. It was me, walking to my car after doing some grocery shopping. I wanted to scream. A week later, I got the second one, a candid shot of me shopping at the mall. At first, I tried ignoring the pictures, but they just kept coming. The envelopes came one after another, each one a picture of me unaware of the camera. Each picture felt like a taunt, a reminder that he was still out there, watching me. I can't describe the terror I lived with during these weeks. I was afraid to leave my house. I couldn't go to work, hang out with friends, or shop without constantly looking over my shoulder. After the sixth envelope, I went to the police. I know you're probably wondering why I didn't go after the first envelope. Honestly, I can't even answer that question. The police were not very helpful. I don't think they even knew what to do, but I wanted them to have a record of my case in the event that something more serious came of it. And that's exactly what happened. One night, knocks echoed against my bedroom window. I knew it was him. The police investigated, found nothing, and left me more scared than I had been before they arrived. I had had enough. I moved apartments immediately after that, leaving no forwarding address, changing all my contact details, and increasing my security measures as best I could. Thankfully, I never heard from that man again. It's only been about 3 months, though, so hopefully, I don't jinx myself by putting this into words. My best guess is that he was able to unlock my phone while I was passed out, and that's how he was able to steal all my information. The worst thing about all of this isn't everything that was stolen or even the fact that my whole life was uprooted when I changed apartments. The worst thing about this situation is that I'll never aspire to work on a cruise ship again. I don't even know if I want to keep working as a bartender. It's crazy how quickly a lifelong dream can turn into a nightmare. How would you define evil? Is it a human murdering another human? Is it doing harm to the innocent? Whatever evil is to you, this story is exactly that. Listen to this. Back in 2018, my family and I went on a cruise vacation for 5 days. It was Christmas time, and this was our usual family tradition. We would take a cruise to the Caribbean islands and then be back by Christmas Eve. It was actually a great holiday vacation. Anyway, I believe it was our last night on the ship. We were heading back to our port in Fort Lauderdale. My sister and I were walking around the ship pretty late. By the way, I was 21 at the time of the story. We were walking around close to the bow of the ship when we both suddenly heard these horrific screams. My sister is a nurse, so we both immediately ran over to where we heard the screams. We got to the very back of the ship and saw this woman standing by the rails, laughing hysterically. A little confused, we both approached her cautiously, asking her if everything was okay because we heard screaming. The woman, who had to be in her mid-30s, started to laugh even harder. Now my sister and I were about to leave this weird woman alone when she started to point her finger over the railing like she wanted to show us something. My sister and I stepped up to the railing and looked down. Down in the black ocean below, barely visible, were 2 young children thrashing in the water, trying to stay afloat. When I tell you my heart sank into my stomach, I am not exaggerating. My sister immediately ran off, screaming for help. I stayed with the woman who was still laughing hysterically. I remember she even bent over the railing and started waving at the children as if they were going off to school. She called out saying, "Bye, kids, mommy loves you." At that point, every cell in my body wanted to attack this woman, but I just froze. I literally thought at any moment I was going to wake up in my cruise cabin and this would all be some hellish nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare, it was real. Crew members came to the bow in 2 minutes. They threw life preservers down below for the children to grab onto. In the meantime, crew members were hastily preparing to lower an emergency lifeboat to save them. This is something that I didn't know happens when someone is overboard. The captain of the ship signals a distress sound, letting the whole crews know the situation. This signal was blaring and the emergency lifeboat finally went into the water trying to save the kids. But even from this distance, I could see that the kids were floating motionless in the dark ocean. When the lifeboat was finally hoisted back up to the ship, the disturbing truth was revealed. Both children had died. And here's what still haunts my dreams. The mother was rocking on her feet, laughing and saying, "Oh good, no more children. I'm free." I could not believe it. When we docked at the port the next day, there was a battalion of police cars waiting to arrest this mother. I don't know all the details, but I do know that she was charged with first-degree murder. Her children were 8 and 6 years old. So yes, I know everyone has a different definition of evil, but I have to believe that this mother was absolutely evil. My sister and I are still traumatized to this day, and yes, my family and I will never get back on a cruise ship again. My greatest fear is drowning at sea. I have nightmares of being underwater with nothing around me but water. For many years, my family took a cruise each Christmas. We often sailed aboard Carnival Cruise, which has beautiful ships out of Florida to the Bahamas, our favorite destination. We also sailed other cruise lines that took unique ships to different destinations around Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and even St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. This chilling nightmare occurred on one of these cruises from Fort Lauderdale to St. Thomas. We were midway on our cruise when we anchored in St. Thomas. We arrived just after dark, and the lights of St. Thomas were beautiful off our port side. We entered the dining room with the best view of the harbor lights. We had a fabulous Caribbean-style dinner of rock lobster and my favorite, conch in a delicious rice dish. After dinner, my sister and I walked on the promenade deck that runs the ship's length outside. The air was warm and fresh, but the Christmas season still required a sweater at night. We started up on the bow and reenacted the scene from the Titanic, leaning out over the railing with our arms outstretched, letting the night air wash over us. It was a beautiful night with amazing stars above. I haven't seen so many stars as you see on a cruise ship. We finished our games of Titanic adventures and began strolling aft to the stern of the ship, letting our dinner digest. We were about 2/3 of the way to the stern rail when we heard these dreadful screams. "No, Mom, no!" My sister looked at me, and I looked at her in bewilderment. What on earth is going on? We ran to the stern, where a woman held a child, maybe about age 7 or 8, over the back of the railing. The child was screaming. Then the woman released her, and we heard her splash into the sea 3 decks below. The woman was laughing dementedly and waving. My sister and I were not sure what had just happened. We were so confused. Was this a game? The woman, perhaps in her late 30s, was nicely dressed in fashionable cruise wear. Her hair was brushed but a little blown in the sea air. She was beautiful, except for the laugh. The laugh went from quietly demented to full-on hysterical. My sister and I looked over the rail where this crazy woman pointed. We could see in the black ocean water, just barely visible in the ship's lights, a child thrashing, trying to stay afloat while crying, "Mommy, Mommy!" My heart jumped in panic, and my sister turned and ran, screaming for help. The woman remained at the stern rail, throwing kisses and saying, "Goodbye, dear. Don't forget Mommy loves you." She then roared with laughter, and not a fun, happy laugh, but one that bit right to the bone. It was so strange. She was waving to the child as if she was sending her off on the school bus, and at the same time, laughing like the devil himself. "Mommy loves you." I was terrified and did not take my eyes off the child for an instant as she drifted further from the ship. I was thinking to myself, this can't be real. This isn't happening. Seconds later, 3 loud blasts burst from the ship's horns, the signal for the man overboard. Crewmen were already racing to the stern with my sister behind them. One had a life preserver in his hand and an orange life vest strapped around his body. I pointed to the child and said, "There she is." He didn't hesitate a second but leaped over the rail and dropped in a splash in the ocean. The second crew member had a spotlight and lit the water. Somewhere aboard, a lifeboat was dropped into the water, and its engine could be heard coming fast. The rescue swimmer had the child in his arms. The deck was filling with passengers curious about what had happened. You could hear everyone saying, "Is someone overboard? Are they alive?" I didn't see the rescue crew bring the child aboard, but the rumor was that she was safe with her father. Ship security took the mother into custody, and a police boat came out from St. Thomas to take her to shore. Some passengers said the woman was telling everyone she passed, "No more children for me. I'm a free woman," and she would cackle that demonic laugh. "See you later, alligator. I'm free." I don't know what happened to the woman, but she must have been committed, for she was insane. My father invited our entire family on a cruise to celebrate May and his 50th wedding anniversary. May was my grandmother. It was my father, his brother's mom, and aunt with all the grandchildren. There were 10 of us for a 3-night cruise from Miami to Bermuda and back to Miami. My sister and I had never been on a cruise before, nor were our cousins, so we were excited. I was the middle age-wise at 13, my sister was the youngest at 10, and our cousins were 13 and 11. Since we all now lived in different parts of the country, we flew to Miami and met at the ship. We arrived first, so my sister and I explored the ship before everyone else arrived. It was a pretty big ship, but not one of the biggest. I think it had something like 1,000 staterooms, so about 2,000 passengers. There were 10 places to eat, 3 pools and whirlpools, a rock climbing wall, mini golf, a fitness center, an entertainment center like an arcade, and a massage spa. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. Don't forget a casino. So we kids had a ton of things to do and ran wild around the ship. Grandpa, May, my dad, mom, and aunt and uncle mostly played gin rummy and mahjong, a favorite card game of May's. They thought we were responsible enough to stay out of trouble. The first 2 nights, we swam, watched Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in the movie theater, and played video games in the arcade. It was on the 3rd and last night that the scary event happened. The adults were playing cards after dinner, and we kids headed out to the upper deck just to watch the ship moving through the stars, which literally rained down on us like a magical world. We sat in the deck chairs and told scary stories, jokes, and stuff like that. Sometime around 12:40, we decided to go to the arcade. Now, it's a little surprising with something like 2,000 people on board. We were the only people on the deck, which was like a ghost town. When we got to the arcade, we had it entirely to ourselves. There was just one lone figure sitting on one of the deck chairs near the railing. As we passed him, I saw it was a very skinny and tall man with stringy hair, wearing a coat and a winter cap. I couldn't tell whether he was staring out to sea or asleep. It was too dark to see any other features. But he didn't look like the other passengers on the ship. We all felt a little uncomfortable walking past him. I was the last to walk past him, and I kept an eye on him the whole time, but he didn't move. As I passed him and breathed a sigh of relief too soon, I heard him speak from behind me. A second after, it wasn't like he spoke, it was more like he mumbled. I turned around, and he stood and walked in my direction. He was tall sitting in the chair, but when he stood up, he was taller than any man I've ever seen. He was ludicrously tall, he had to have been almost 7 feet. I don't know how tall, just really tall. My heart pounded, and I was scared to death. My sister and cousins were already in the arcade, and the door had shut. I was staring at this creep by myself. As he got closer, he pulled his coat around his neck, which was super skinny with a huge Adam's apple. When he was about 5 feet from me, he stopped, stooped over, took his hand out of his coat pocket, and, in an outstretched arm, held a voodoo doll. "Do you want to buy this?" he asked. I gasped, "No," and turned and ran away. When I entered the arcade, everyone was already at a game. I chose Jurassic Park to play and quickly forgot about my scary encounter. I wish this story had ended there, but it didn't. As I played the video game, I heard the door open and felt the sea air blow across me. I turned to look, and the creepy voodoo man walked in. I instantly went to everyone and said, "It's time to go." We went to the lounge where the adults played cards and chatted with them briefly. They then gave each of us a hug and a kiss and set off to bed. We went down to our stateroom, and the adults played card games. We returned to our room without seeing the creep from the deck, got into our PJs, and curled up on the bunks to sleep. It didn't take long, and all of us were sound asleep. But at some time after 1 o'clock, my sister got up to use the toilet. When she turned the light on, she screamed bloody murder. There, in a chair, sat this strange tall man. When she screamed, he stood up, and all of us were up. I don't know how it happened, but he tripped on his own feet and fell into the bathroom. My older cousin slammed the door and placed the chair in front of it to barricade the monster in. Our parents, now in the cabin next to ours, heard the commotion and screams and raced over. We told them there was a scary man in the bathroom. They called ship security, who came and handcuffed the man. They placed him in a cell especially for criminal behavior. It turned out the man was not a passenger on the manifest. They don't know how he got on board without being spotted, but he did. It was suspected that he had mental disorders when they attempted to question him. He was locked in the cell below deck for his and everyone's safety. When we arrived back at port, the police came aboard and took him away. I don't know if it was to a jail or a mental hospital. How he managed to find our stateroom is a mystery. How he got into our room is my fault. I didn't lock the door. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.